the brass tacks of game design. As the title suggests, what we're going to be doing today is we're not going to be looking at the little happy fairies that inspire our designer panel over here. We're actually going to be delving into the practicalities of game design, what actually happens in the studio during, from inception through to completion of a project, and the designer's role. We're also going to try and address the problems that occur in the design and production process, because generally, as well, you know, it doesn't go smoothly. Okay. And if we have time, we'd like to touch on potentially the future responsibilities of game designers and our role in the industry going forward in growing and maturing our industry. So before I kick off, and I genuinely don't like the sound of my own voice, so what I'm going to ask all of our panelists to do is introduce themselves, and then we'll go from there. So, starting with
okay, my name's David Hewitt. I'm the creative director at Tantalus.
My name's Pearson. I'm a senior designer at Pandemic Studios.
Contrary to the sign, I'm not at Luton, but I'm at Studio Oz. My name's Gigliotti, and I'm the design/creative director at Studio Oz.
we'll have a word.
Yeah, you should get somebody on that, please.
Heads will roll.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, so we have Tantalus, we have Pandemic, and we have Studio Oz. This is really important because we have three very, very diverse studios here. And in most cases, at least one of these gentlemen will represent the kind of structure you have, or you will become involved in, especially for the students in our audience. And this is really, really important because, bear in mind, I know it's the end of the day and we're all pretty tired, but we're here to learn. Okay? And in one of their talk, or in this talk, you have an opportunity here to address each of these people directly. What I'm going to try and encourage you to do is, I have a series of questions that I get to pose to them. They may not necessarily meet your needs. So let's make this as casual as possible. Just if you have something that you want to say, or if you want an extension on an answer that you give, just stick your hand up. We will have a Q&A session at the end, but I actually recommend that you don't wait for that. Put your hand up and stop discussing the issues that you are having, or issues that they may have had, and you want to learn or want a greater insight into. The big thing is shyness. Try to leave your shyness at the door. I guarantee you in all these things, and I include myself in this, if you have a question in mind, honestly put your hand up and ask it, because the guy next to you is probably more shy than you, wants to know exactly the same thing, and is hoping that somebody else in the room will stick their hand up. So if you wouldn't mind, just interact with these guys. Pick their brains. That's why they're here. So let's kick off. And we're going to start right at the beginning, which is where everybody starts, including sound of music. So my first question is going to go to David here, and like I said, we'll start at the concept phase. Tantalus is pitching for a project, and it's based on an IP that David's never heard of, and it appeals to a market that nobody knew existed. So in those earliest stages, let's find out what the design process involves.
Well, we were saying that the question you're asking kind of relates to pretty much everything I've ever done. Where I've been in history a long while, kind of around about 10 years. I've shipped, I think, 15, 16 separate titles, some of which are more there's a lot of work being done. None of those games include me in their target audience. I've never made a game that's directed at myself or people like me. So it's true to say, like, you know, and sometimes these things are more familiar than others. I mean, sometimes there's, you know, you're working on a racing game and you fundamentally understand why I've played racing games and all of that. This stuff that you can get. Other examples, I mean, we've had a SpongeBob SquarePants game a couple of years ago, and I obviously hadn't heard of SpongeBob, never seen the show. We've had Pony Friends recently, which is a game aimed at young girls. And obviously, I'm not the audience for that. I'd be kidding myself if I thought I could understand what that person wants without looking into it a little bit. So the first thing to do is a heap of research, really. And part of that's about looking at other games that audience plays. And analysing what those games do, whether they've been successful, whether they haven't been, but also casting a wider net. Like if it's a community that has you know, discussion forums or other medium which they can interact with each other, you know, chasing down some of that stuff, looking at what people are genuinely interested in, what they're concerned about, what they're frustrated by with what they've been offered so far. Sometimes you're lucky enough to get some market research. In Pony Friends example specifically, we're able to get some information about, you know, study was done with a group of kids who are the target audience for this game. You know, here's what music they listen to. Here are the celebrities they look up to. Here's you know, what other games they play, what magazines they read, and sort of, you know, having a bit of a look at all that stuff around, like not just specifically the type of game you're making, but getting a sense of what that person wants. And something that we found useful was to think about that audience not as a kind of a collection of data and statistics, but as a single individual person. And on Pony Friends particularly, that kind of difficult for the team to get a head around that. And so we found an image of a particular girl that we thought represented the absolutely prototypical player of this game, and when faced with the design decision or deciding whether to pick a battle of you know, making something, you know, more complicated or more realistic or more fantastic, or those sorts of decision points, was sort of, you know, holding that picture up in front of us and saying, well, what would she want us to do? And having, you know, spent some time getting into the mindset of those people. It's different on different games. I mean, certainly games that are aimed at a more hardcore audience, you have a bit more data, there are more games, there's more discussions. Here's a question.
Quick question for you. At that early stage, would you look at doing any kind of target research to the level of actually getting people in for a closed session to ask them questions, say, oh, if we presented this game to you, would you want more of this or more of that? Or is it too early at that stage to do that kind of in-depth look?
It depends. It has happened some. It doesn't happen all the time. It has happened sometimes. It's often directed by the publisher rather than by us specifically. That, though, becomes more useful if you're able to provide the publisher with some specific questions. Oftentimes, you're sort of asking questions too early or too late, and they're not that much use. But early on, yeah, you kind of want to say, well, one of the things that came out with Pony Friends, for example, is early on it was a little more competitive, a little bit more, I guess, you know, realistically more about equestrian events and so on. But what came out of our market research early on was that the audience of this game wasn't that interested in that, and they really wanted the slightly more down-to-earth, hands-on, looking after this animal as a pet sort of experience. And that actually really helped steer the ship. It kind of buggered us up a bit in that we had to redo a whole bunch of stuff. But in the end, I think the game was, you know, a better fit for its target audience because of that. So, you know, the earlier the better with that stuff, really, for asking very general questions, and hopefully later on in production, those tests and focus groups are more about, you know, usability issues, interface issues, you know, smaller, finer detail.
The only reason I brought it up is because, by the sound of it, a title like Pony Friends, I don't know if there would be anybody, unless they had a young girl child of their own, they probably wouldn't know precisely what they were looking for, anybody on the design team. So that's why I was asking the question. No,
and you also get the people who do have the child at that age, and they just assume that whatever that kid says is the thing. Yeah. So, and it's not just something that we fall prey to, it's also somebody that publishes, well, my daughter looked at this and she said that it has to be blah. And you know, individuals have, you know, wildly varying preferences. It's a matter of getting that kind of customer broadened and getting a sense of what that group as a whole is what's going to satisfy most of them. It's very tricky, but certainly, you know, really important to dig into that stuff early on and get a sense of it. Otherwise, you just get missed the target.
You actually raised a really, really interesting point. I'm going to throw the next question to Lewis on there, because Pony Friends is a case in point that, you know, potentially the consumer didn't know that they were looking for it to start with, because it wasn't an established IP. Whereas if you look at what THQ has been doing for a good number of years now, they work pretty much exclusively with known IP. So whereas Dad comes from a place where he you know, it is pretty much a lot of supposition and a lot of research to start with. Lewis comes from a place where they have an established brand and they have an established market. So what I'm curious to know is what THQ do in those early stages when you have a lot of this information.
Well, first thing, you know, one license, we're working on the Warhammer 40K license now, and you're talking about 30 years of illustration, 30 years of literature, Games Workshop. There's a very loyal fan base. So it's doing, you know, to Dave's point, a lot of research up front and really getting to know the license in and out, especially if it's a well-established license. Because the first thing you want to do is, you're talking about millions of fans, people who are very loyal to the brand, and you don't want to offend any of them, right? At the same time, we're not making a tabletop game. So you have to establish that relationship very early with the licensee, in this case Games Workshop, and really kind of negotiate. And I always promote this with my designers, to really learn the art of negotiation with the publisher, with